Let's say that I walk into a psychology conference where somebody is about to give a talk on the subject of reprogramming memory cells in the brain, which, by the way, is a real thing. It's an article that I read this morning that was just absolutely fascinating. But let's say that whoever it was who wrote this article is about to go up there and give a presentation to a few hundred of his fellow psychology colleagues. And instead of him going up on stage, I walk up, and instead of giving a presentation on anything that's science-based, I start talking about transcendence, meditation, the divine feminine, and spirituality in all of its wonderful forms. How do you think all of those psychologists would look at me as I walked off the stage, if they even let me get through my entire presentation to get to the point where I got to walk off the stage? On the other hand, what if I walked into a group meditation retreat where a few dozen people were getting ready to be guided through a meditation? And I told them that I would absolutely guide them through the meditation, but first they had to listen to me go on and on about the latest research in brain development. Let's talk about nanoparticles, and let's talk about brain aging, and let's talk about brain diseases and injuries and that kind of thing. And then they could have their meditation. How do you think those people would look at me then? I'm guessing that in either scenario, I wouldn't really be making any lifelong friends. And it's not just about the bait and switch. You go for a meditation, you expect to get a meditation, or you go for a particular psychology conference and you expect that type of information. It's not just about the bait and switch that these people would be upset at me for. They would be upset because the views that I would be introducing to them definitely wouldn't jive with their own particular views and the way that they think about the world. And that's because psychology and spirituality are seen as two very different things. So the scientific world sees spirituality as very woo-woo, and the spiritual realm sees psychology as being too rigid and too structured and too focused on traditional medicine and traditional science. And so they're almost seen as being mutually exclusive. So can these two very different fields coexist? That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. I'm Elizabeth, and my life's work is centered on blending metaphysical approaches with more traditional psychological-based modalities. I've been into psychology my entire life. In fact, I nearly went into psychology right out of high school. I didn't. I went into marketing, and then I got an English literature degree, but I always was fascinated by psychology. But it wasn't until almost 20 years later when I decided to go back to school that I actually did, in fact, go into psychology, and that's a story for another time. But it wasn't until I got really bad postpartum depression after my daughter was born, and I looked at those traditional types of therapy for a way out, and I quickly realized that my answer didn't lie there. By going through traditional therapy, I was able to get myself part of the way through postpartum depression, but it wasn't going to get me all the way out, which is what I desperately needed. The only way to actually get all the way better was to combine the traditional psychological approach with my own spiritual awakening. And it had such a powerful impact on me that now I can imagine looking at my life or anyone else's life through any other lens that doesn't include combining spirituality with more practical psychology-based approaches for personal development and for personal growth. In fact, both of these fields, psychology and spirituality, offer such a deep-ranging depth of knowledge that to eliminate either one of them or to discount it would be doing ourselves an immense disservice. I've spent the last few years reading everything I could get my hands on in both fields. I've attended lectures, I have talked to spiritual gurus, I have talked to psychologists and psychiatrists. Like I said, I have taken courses, I have done everything I can to immerse myself in both fields and figure out how the two of them can not just coexist, but how we can bring them together to live our best, most authentic life. And yet, if you look at these two fields, they are populated by very different types of people. The people who do the research and who do the work in each particular field, they're on different ends of the spectrum that I call the belief versus logic spectrum. You've got your academics who live over here in their academic world, and I'm not saying that they're secluded, but just that their approach is very specific. So they are looking at things that can be verified. They are looking for quantifiable data. They are looking for things that make sense in a black and white kind of way, things that can be proven. And then you've got the spiritual gurus over here, and they are the people who work with their intuition, who work with their inner knowing, who work with spirit guides and their highest self, and they talk to angels, and they use Reiki for energy healing, and they use all of these things that require a tremendous amount of faith, but that can't actually be proven on paper. I am endlessly fascinated by the way that we as humans go through our lives. I am constantly asking myself questions like, why do we think the things we think? Why do we say the things we say? Why do we do the things we do? And ultimately, why do we believe the things that we believe? These questions have spurred a lot of research for me. Like I said, I've done a lot of reading and studying, and I have really wanted to pluck out the answer from a scientific tome or a scientific study. I've really wanted to understand how we work as people, and I wanted that answer delivered to me in black and white. And I've wanted this for decades. And it wasn't until my mid-30s that I realized that that answer just wasn't going to be found in a book. And that's because we as human beings are so complex. And if you think about what a small portion of the brain we actually use, of course there's a lot about us and the way that we live our lives and the way that we think and what we believe that isn't going to be easily explained by science. And here's a bit of interesting trivia for you. The word psychology comes from the Greek language. Psyche is the word for the mind or the soul. And logos is the word for study. So psychology is the study of the mind or the soul. Now, in the Western world, we really focus on treating psychology as the study of the mind, the study of the brain in particular. And then you've got neuroscience as well, which is the more scientific-based approach to what's going on in our heads. But psychology is very much the study of the mind. But we really do tend to forget about the study of the soul and how that is integral to this whole psychology component. So if you look at spirituality as taking up where psychology leaves off, as picking up that part that talks about the soul and tries to understand the soul, then you're looking at things that are not explained by science, of course. So you're looking at transcendence. You're looking at transcending the logical mind in order to understand more about yourself and more about other people. In my opinion, I don't think we could ever really understand ourselves, understand what makes us tick, understand how to get in touch with our own authentic selves, unless we dive deep into both of these fields. The psychology piece allows us to be rational and logical and really look at ourselves and the world around us in that way. And then you've got the spirituality piece, which allows us to transcend the logical mind. And it doesn't make it better than psychology. I really do want to focus on that and emphasize that. Psychology is not less than spirituality because spirituality transcends the mind. They are two very different approaches to getting to the same point. I find that just like I did, most people are looking for a basic black and white answer to their problems. They're looking for a way to make decisions quickly and easily, for example. They're looking for a way to understand themselves better. And so psychology is great for that. But even if you think about how you go through your day-to-day life, you're going to encounter situations in that day-to-day life that are going to require you to call on your rational, logical mind to make decisions. And then you're going to encounter situations where you're really going to want to go with your gut. You're going to want to tap into your intuition. You're going to want to tap into that inner knowing that is unexplainable, where maybe you're relying on dream symbolism that came to you last night, or maybe you're looking at synchronicity in your life in a certain way. And you're going to use that to make decisions as you go through your life. But you can't do that unless you're willing to accept both psychology and spirituality as being major components in how you make decisions and how you think about yourself and the world around you. And lastly, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the role that psychology, traditional psychology, plays in healing, especially healing from very real trauma that happens to many of us throughout our lives. In some cases, we can be so affected by this trauma that we don't dig into with a therapist that it can really stifle our spiritual growth. If we've got issues from our past, child abuse, rape, any kind of mental health issue that is pervasive, then that could really stifle our own spiritual growth, our own understanding of ourselves. And if we are so fixated on just that spiritual piece, for example, and we're not willing to do the traditional work of healing ourselves, of healing our mind, of healing that trauma, then that is really going to stifle how far we can go in that spiritual growth. So yes, I wholeheartedly believe that spirituality and psychology can coexist. And not just coexist, but thrive together. Maybe down the road we're going to see a new modality, some kind of spiritual counseling, some kind of spiritual psychotherapy that is going to be widely accepted and mainstream. But until then, I would love to hear your take on this topic. What do you think about the intersection between psychology and spirituality? Is there a way for both of them to coexist? Is there a way to make spirituality more mainstream and to make psychology a little less threatening for the spiritual crowd? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Please let me know in the comments below, and I'd love to participate in the discussion with you. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.